Let's go Broncos! A situation is developing inside the Denver Broncos roster that could end up having much bigger consequences than most people realize. And what's fascinating is that it involves three things every successful NFL team needs: depth, competition, and opportunity. Because sometimes the most important offseason stories aren't about superstar players. They're about the unexpected openings that suddenly appear. They're about young players fighting to prove they belong. And they're about coaches being forced to make difficult decisions when multiple talented players are competing for the same spot. Right now, that's exactly what's happening in Denver. One player who had been quietly building momentum this offseason has suddenly hit an unfortunate setback. At the same time, several young Broncos are being handed a chance they may not have expected to receive this early. And if any of them take advantage of that opportunity, it could completely change the outlook of an entire position group before training camp even begins. But that's only part of the story. Because another battle is quietly heating up on the defensive side of the ball, and it involves a position where the Broncos may have more talent than they can realistically keep. The competition is getting tighter. The evaluations are becoming more important. And some very difficult decisions may be waiting just around the corner. The question is no longer whether the Broncos have talent. The question is whether they have too much talent at certain positions. And trust me, that's a much better problem to have than the alternative. Before we dive into all the details, make sure you've already hit the like button if you believe competition makes the Denver Broncos stronger. And I want every optimistic Broncos fan watching right now to leave this comment below. Go Broncos! Iron sharpens iron. Personally, I think this is one of the healthiest signs we're seeing from the Broncos right now. When injuries happen, other players immediately have opportunities to step forward. When roster spots aren't guaranteed, competition increases. And when multiple young players are fighting for the same role, coaches usually discover more about their roster than they ever could through simple practice evaluations alone. In my opinion, the depth battles we're seeing right now may tell us more about the future of this team than any highlight play from OTAs. Now let's talk about why Caleb Blauner's injury may have created a huge opportunity for several young Broncos trying to make a name for themselves. Personally, I think these are the types of stories that tell us the most about a football team. Star players will always grab headlines, but championships are often built on depth, competition, and unexpected contributors stepping up when opportunities arise. And from everything we're hearing out of OTAs, the Broncos seem to have plenty of competition taking place across the roster. That's usually a very healthy sign for a team trying to reach the next level. The timing of this development is what makes it so important. According to the information discussed, Caleb Blauner will miss the remainder of OTAs and mandatory minicamp after undergoing a lower body cleanup procedure. While the expectation is that he will be back for training camp, the reality is that this absence comes at a critical moment in his development. And that's where the conversation becomes really interesting. Because just a short time ago, Caleb Blauner was one of the most intriguing young players being discussed around the Broncos. Sean Payton had publicly mentioned him during rookie minicamp. There was growing curiosity about his athletic traits, his physical development, and what he might become in his second season. Every practice represented another opportunity to build momentum. Now, that momentum has temporarily been put on hold. The challenge for Blauner isn't necessarily the injury itself. The challenge is everything happening while he's away. Because football doesn't stop. Position battles don't stop. Evaluations don't stop. And perhaps most importantly, opportunities don't stop. While Blauner recovers, other players are receiving valuable reps that could influence how the coaching staff views the tight end room heading into training camp. That's why names like Justin Joly and Don Bedley become so important in this discussion. The source material repeatedly emphasized that these younger players now have a chance to maximize additional opportunities during practices. Every route run, every catch, every positive impression matters. If one of these players starts stacking strong performances together, it naturally increases the competition once training camp arrives. And let's be honest, competition was already intense before this injury occurred. The Broncos have multiple tight ends competing for roster spots. Veterans are already in place. Young players are trying to establish themselves. Draft investments have been made. Every roster position at that group feels valuable. That doesn't mean Caleb Blauner is suddenly in danger. In fact, one of the points discussed in the source material was that training camp remains the most important evaluation period anyway. OTAs are useful. Minicamp is valuable. But when pads come on and the physical aspect of football increases, that's when many of the most important decisions start taking shape. The encouraging part for Blauner is that his return is still expected for training camp. If that timeline holds true, he'll still have opportunities to compete. He'll still have opportunities to impress. He'll still have opportunities to show the growth that generated excitement earlier this offseason. But while the tight end room is dealing with this storyline, another fascinating battle continues developing elsewhere on the roster. And honestly, this might become one of the most talked about competitions of the entire summer. The cornerback position. Because according to the discussion surrounding OTAs, Sean Payton confirmed that Jahdae Barron will have an opportunity to compete for an outside cornerback role. And that immediately creates questions about how the Broncos plan to structure one of the most important position groups on the team. What's particularly interesting is that Barron has not yet fully participated in team activities as he continues working his way back from an off-season procedure. That means much of the conversation right now is based on projection rather than direct competition. But the possibility alone is enough to grab attention. Because if Barron is competing on the outside, what does that mean for the current depth chart? What does that mean for the future? What does that mean for players currently holding those roles? Those are questions that don't have answers yet. And that's exactly why Broncos fans should be paying close attention as training camp approaches. My opinion on this situation is simple. Injuries are always frustrating, especially for young players trying to build momentum. But the bigger story here may actually be the competition being created throughout the roster. The Broncos appear to have legitimate depth battles taking place at multiple positions, and that's usually a sign of a healthy football team. The players who take advantage of these opportunities over the next several weeks could end up playing much bigger roles than anyone currently expects. And that's exactly why the cornerback battle may become one of the defining storylines of Broncos training camp. Right now, there are more questions than answers. According to the discussion from OTAs, Riley Moss continues operating with confidence and doesn't appear affected by the speculation surrounding the position. In fact, some of the observations highlighted strong coverage reps and steady play during the portions of practice that were available to evaluate. That matters because when competition starts heating up, coaches want to see players respond with performance rather than frustration. And so far, there doesn't appear to be any sign that Moss is backing down from the challenge. If anything, the competition could bring out the best in everyone involved. That's one of the advantages of having depth. Nobody gets comfortable. Nobody assumes anything. Every player understands that opportunities must be earned. And when that happens, the overall level of play across the roster often improves. But what really caught my attention from the discussion was how much uncertainty still exists regarding the long-term picture. Because this isn't simply about who starts during week 1. This is also about the future of the position group. The Broncos have invested heavily in their secondary. They have multiple talented players competing for roles. They have young players still developing. And eventually, decisions will need to be made regarding who fits into the long-term vision of the defense. That's why Jahdae Barron's situation is so fascinating. The source material made it clear that the Broncos view him as a versatile player capable of doing multiple things within the defense. But first-round selections are generally expected to contribute in meaningful ways. That reality naturally creates curiosity regarding how Denver plans to maximize his talent once he's fully participating. And honestly, that might be one of the biggest unanswered questions of the entire offseason. Because versatility is valuable. But at some point, players need consistent opportunities. The coaching staff will